God is awesome. And he's so awesome that in heaven, we're not going to be able to stop singing his praises. It's not that we're going to have to or be duty bound to. It's that that's going to be the natural response. He's that awesome. It's going to be a celebration that nothing can hold back. And that is going to be a glorious day. It's something we look forward to. What's also awesome is summer camp and vacation. And I get to go away for vacation with my family on Monday. We're going to go to BC, and we'll be gone for a week, so I'm letting you all know. And we're going to have a great time doing some mountain biking. You can pray for our safety because we actually get to mountain bike on one day. We get to mountain bike on a ski hill, and the chairlift takes you up, and me and two of my boys get to mountain bike down. And we did it once before, and it was pretty fun. We only had a couple wipeouts, but definitely pray for some safety. And summer camp, after that, when I come back, from the 7th to the 13th, I get to go and give a week to summer camp and just serve as a camp counselor. Two of my boys are going to be at summer camp. Bethel Bible Camp is where we're going. It's a wonderful camp that we've been blessed with for a few years now. They operate by donation, which is a huge blessing, allowing large families to go to have their kids in camp at a rate that they can actually afford, instead of just saying, sorry, we just can't do that. So it's amazing, such a ministry to people like me, that it really was on my heart. You know, this is the kind of camp that I would love to give to. And it's going to be long days, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., probably later, with these little 9 and 10-year-olds that are going to wear me out, but God's going to provide. And Ella Calera is going to come on, and she's going to do kitchen help there as well. So that's going to be really great. And if you're interested in doing camp ministry next year like this, sorry for the short notice, but next year, let me know, because I'll put your name down, and we'll talk about it early on. And it would be great. It would be great to do that with youth and maybe college students who, are waiting for their school the next year. So that's my plug for summer camp next year, and my prayer request for going on vacation. Okay, so it's a family Sunday, and I gotta say, it's looking a little emptier today, but it is summer and it is long weekend, so we get it. Today we are going to be taking some time in a passage that is all about seeing and living by faith. How do we see by faith? Yeah, it is a good question. It's easy to say and to talk about, but to practice and do in the more mundane moments of life, in the different facets of our life, that's a little harder. And a couple weeks ago, we had Mark Evans preach from 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 to 5. And my passage today is verses 6 to 8, 2 Timothy verses 6 to 8. And it's one big unit of thought encouraging Timothy, and as we'll see, encouraging us. This is how we need to see our life in the world. It's how we need to see the world, and this is how we need to see not just the world, but who we are in it and where we're going. Who we are in it and where we're going. It's all about seeing by faith and having that sight. Mark Evans taught about faithfulness to the Word. He taught about being faithful not just in the content of the Word, not just faithfulness to the message in 2 Timothy 4, 1 to 5, but faithfulness in the distribution of your gifts, in actually serving in a faithful way. And the encouragement to to Timothy was keep on in it. Don't give up. Don't stop. The world looks like it's getting worse and worse, and it is. And in chapter 3, he warns Timothy, things are going to go from bad to worse. That's the direction things are going. Oh man, Paul, that's not what you tell someone if you're trying to encourage them, that things are just going to get harder. Why would you say that? And then later on, in Mark's passage, in chapter 4, he says, again, things are going to go from having terrible times in chapter 3 to bad to worse in chapter 4. And again, Paul, why would you tell Timothy this? You're trying to encourage him. And you kind of keep saying things are going to get bad from worse. It's going to get noisy. These teachers, there's going to be more and more false teachers. And they're going to be confusing the message. They're going to be throwing out their own message. They're going to be teaching the things that people want to hear, the things that scratch their ears. That's what's going to happen. And people won't want to put up with sound doctrine anymore. They're just going to want to scratch that itch. And they'll gather these teachers around, many teachers, and that's the voice that's going to be lifted up. And so in this cacophony of sound and craziness and busyness and things going bad to worse, and people being lovers of themselves, right? Not lovers of God, not lovers of their neighbors, that's the environment that's kind of moving forward. And so Paul's telling Timothy, you got to see through that. You got to cut through that. Don't be discouraged by that. And in chapter 4, verse 1, he frames it all. He frames those 5 verses. He says, in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing and his kingdom. In view of his appearing and his kingdom. This is the lens that Timothy needs to be looking through. If he's going to see through all of this chaos, all of this noise, all the destruction of when people start to believe and really embrace that life is all about me. It's all about my dreams, my wealth, maybe my education, my job, career, my power, satisfying my appetites, and all of those things. It becomes very destructive very quickly. And yet, Paul says, that's the direction that it's progressing. And so, Timothy, you need to preach the word now. So at the same time that it's discouraging, it's also very encouraging. Because there's never any better moment to preach the word than now. If things are progressively kind of going downhill and getting crazier and getting harder, there is never a better moment to preach the word than now. And so he says, preach the gospel. Preach the good news in verse 4. Verse 5, he says, fill it up. The NIV says, discharge your ministry duties. The word that Paul uses is closer to fulfill. And it's easy to miss this in English, but it has this sense to it that's fill it up. Fill up your ministry. Fill up your ministry duties. All the way to the top of the cup. What's the cup? Well, it's his life. And it's his ministry duties. Fill it up to the brim. That's his encouragement to Timothy. And then he moves into our passage. Our passage is verse 5 to 8. And he says, for I am already being poured out. Fill it up, Timothy, because I'm being poured out. Paul has done his filling up. Now he's encouraging Timothy, fill it up. I'm being poured out. There's never a better moment than now. I'm going. You're here. This is faithfulness. Be faithful to the message. Be faithful to discharge your duties and fill it up. And now our passage, I'm going to read it. It's 2 Timothy 4, 6 to 8. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So this encouragement to Timothy, this right at the end, it captures those 9 verses. This is for all who long for that day. And we're going to get into that. But we're going to start out with the drink offering, this drink offering. Now, if you're like me, and this is confession time, it's work to study the offerings that originate in the Old Testament. It's work. When you go through them, it can just become this muddy mess that you're like, when does this happen? Who offers this? What is this? What does it signify? What is its value for me? And it's a lot of work. And it can be discouraging to study it because it's a whole lot of praying and a whole lot of studying and reflecting. And it takes time. But it's really going to bless us today to look at this drink offering and to look at what it is and what it represents for God's people, for us. So this drink offerings in the Bible, they start all the way back with Jacob pouring a drink offering out. And then as you move through the first 5 books of the Bible, you see these drink offerings appear as part of a sacrifice. They're not the main sacrifice. They're not the sin offering, right? They're just something that is given almost as a statement of dependence on God, thanks to God, and they're given and they're poured out around the offering. And so you see the drink offering, it's not the main thing. It's just almost like a side thing, but it's important. It's important. These drink offerings, they were given oftentimes in corporate settings. So they were given as part of offerings at a festival. They were given oftentimes at harvest time. It would be a thanks to God. You'd pour it out and you'd give thanks to God, and it was a statement of, I'm giving you the first fruits because you've given all this to me, and I'm trusting you that you'll give me more. I'm trusting in your provision. And so ultimately it was a statement of hope and thanks and trust to God. That's what these drink offerings were all about. Now, like I said, they were part of the daily sacrifice. They were part of a lot of sacrifices. And so the hardest part is they can seem so mundane, so unimportant. But then David takes it to a whole new level. He's getting chased around and he's hiding in caves, all for being a good citizen. And the king is after him, and Philistines are occupying Jerusalem. And in 2 Samuel 23:16, he's hiding in one of these caves in the desert. And he's hiding, and he just kind of blurts. He just kind of blurts out, oh, it would be so amazing to have water from the well of Jerusalem. So his mighty men do what mighty men do. And they break through enemy lines, and they make it all the way to Jerusalem, 20 kilometers approximately away. They get this water. Water's heavy. Like, when was the last time we had to carry water? We forget that. If you've ever had to carry water, it's heavy. They run 20 clicks there, they break through, they come back with this water in this heat, in this desert, and they give it to David. David, here it is. But David, in verse 17 of 2 Samuel, says, "Far be it from me, Lord, to do this." He's before God. He doesn't say it to the men. He talks to God, and he says, "Far be it from me to do this, Lord. Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their own lives?" And he wouldn't drink it. And we could talk about how this would have possibly negatively impacted the mighty men and a lot of these details. But to really get after the connection between Paul's drink offering and this drink offering, David poured it out because he was acknowledging, my life is in God's hands. My life is in God's hands. It's not in the hands of these mighty men. It's not in this water that my body desperately needs. And so he denied himself. He put his own personal health on the line. And he poured it out as a drink offering before God. He's acknowledging by doing this, under that point that his life is in God's hands, that he doesn't need to take advantage of others for his own betterment or survival. He's saying, if my life is in God's hands, I can give back the things that I desperately want, the things that I crave. I can give those things to God, knowing that he'll provide for what I actually, really, really actually need. He's saying that if my life is in God's hands, I can get rid of those things that give me a false sense of comfort, even if there's nothing inherently wrong with them. I mean, this is water, for Pete's sake, in a desert. Like we said, he needs this. But he saw the temptation in it. He saw their life, that this was their life, and he doesn't need to depend on it. He was going to depend on God. And this is how Paul saw his life, as a drink offering. Who's doing the pouring here? In David's example, he poured it out voluntarily. In Paul's example, who's doing the pouring? Is it Paul? Is it a priest? Is it God? The answer is it's God. God is doing the pouring. Paul has filled up his life, like he's encouraging Timothy. He's filled up his life to the brim. He's filled up this cup, and God is pouring it out. And he's going to pour it out all the way until it's empty. And in the same way, Paul is acknowledging, my life is in God's hands. My health is in God's hands. My future is in God's hands. He had learned the secret to be content in any circumstance, because his life was in God's hands. He could do all things through Christ who strengthened him. And this is his encouragement for Timothy and for us. If we say and believe that our life is in God's hands, we, with Paul and Timothy, can and should see our life as a drink offering, where God has given us gifts for his glory, and we get to fill it up all the way until he pours it out. Philippians 2:17. You know what? We'll look at that verse a little bit later. We're gonna move to 2 Timothy 4:7 and 8 now, and we're going to look at his illustrations for what this looked like in his life. And verses 7 and 8 say, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Then he says, now there's in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. The word pictures that Paul is using, they all point to one thing. And he uses three individual ones, and they have value in themselves, but they all point to something big. They point to a big event. They point to the games, the Olympic Games. And everybody would have known about this, and Paul's using language that points directly to this. Later he mentions a crown. He mentions running. He mentions fighting, boxing. And he's pointing to the games. That's what he's doing. And he says that he's a fighter, that he's a runner, and he's a keeper. He's holding on faithfully to the gospel. He's not a spectator. He's not watching. The games for him they're not entertainment. Life isn't entertainment. Life isn't about aimlessly running or watching. It's about running for a prize. Running for a prize. And so on that, he says in 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, he says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? So he says, run like you want the prize. So he's taking a human example. He's not saying out of the room of us, only one of us is going to get the prize. He's saying, run like you actually want the prize. Use your life as that drink offering. Compete like you actually are going for the prize. Everyone who competes in the games, they go into strict training. They do it to get the crown that will not last. So in the games, humanly speaking, people would compete and train and go through all of this blood, sweat, and tears to get a crown that would fade and wither. It was made of a plant, like a vine, and it's going to wade and it's going to fade. But the one that Paul's talking about is going to last forever. Therefore, don't run like somebody who's running aimlessly. He says, I don't fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Paul's life isn't aimless. He sees it as a drink offering, and so it's focused. It's focused. I remember when I was in grade 9 or 10, and for part of my school, I had to go help coach. I was an assistant coach. And we didn't really watch sports. I still don't watch sports, so kind of funny that I was going to be an assistant coach. But I get on the field, and I'm trying to figure out, what do I do? Man, I've never played an organized sport in my life. And I'm watching these kids, and they're young. They're like, if my memory's right, 7 or 8. They're really little. And you know what? They weren't very good at soccer. Sorry, if you're that age, I'm sorry. But at 7 or 8, oftentimes, there's a lot of other things that you want to be doing than playing an organized sport. You'd rather be exploring and doing whatever your creative minds lead you to, right? But here they are on the soccer field. They're on the field. And I'm watching the game, and some of the kids are playing. And some of the kids are literally, hey, I'm making a new friend with the teammate, with the opposite team. And they're chatting. They're just making a buddy. And that's really sweet, but it's not what they were there for. And then I see, I'll never forget, this is the most vivid picture. Then I see this kid, and he's just running. He's going for it. But he's not going after the ball. He's going after a butterfly. Okay? Yeah. So he's going after this butterfly. He's going after something, and he's veering and careening aimlessly to get this butterfly that shortly after he catches it is going to die. That butterfly is going to die. Is that my life? Am I running after that butterfly that is just going to die? Or am I focused on the goal? Am I playing the ultimate game, if you will, that God has given me, the race that He's given me, the fight that He's given me, the good fight? On this, Hebrews 12, 1-3 says, we do this by throwing off everything that's tripping us up and fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And so that's what I have to ask myself is, what's tripping me up? What's tripping me up from running? I really want to run. I want to run. As we get older, it's harder to run, physically, literally. There are things that just don't work as well. There's extra weight that when we fall, it hurts more, right? There's this life, we want to run, but spiritually, we can run. No matter what age, young or old, we can run. Part of that is throwing off those things that are tripping us up. And sometimes these things that are tripping us up, the first place that we often go is unrepentant sin. That's oftentimes, and I'm going to say tragically, it's important to repent for your sin. And it's important to resist sin, those besetting sins that we seem to be fighting all our life. That's important. But if that's the dead end that we go to, then we're missing the point. That's part of it. Throwing off those things, that's part of it. But it's not all there is to it. If that's all we do, we're starting to resemble the women in 2 Timothy 3, 6-7, that are loaded down with sin, and they're swayed. That means they're led around, right, by evil desires. And they are always learning, but they're never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And so what they do, because they're weighed down, because they're guilty, all they focus on is their sin and learning something new. My sin and learning something new. And as Christians, if that's how we approach spiritual life and running, it's a dead end. And it's not where Jesus wants to take us. Jesus wants us to come to a knowledge of the truth, and that's in Him. It's bound up in a relationship with Him. And if all I do is pursue moralism for its sake, that's not Jesus. And so my pursuit has to be more than that. It has to be taking off those things, but it has to be putting on Jesus, loving Jesus, and that's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to see by the time we get to the end of this passage. It's good to resist sin. But if we're not doing it because we love Jesus, then we're missing out. Some of the things that are tripping us up, those things that we need to let go of, are not bad things. They're like the water. They're like the water that David poured out. Theoretically, there's nothing wrong with David drinking that water. But what it represented was wrong. And there are things that all of us have access to. That all of us, we go to those things for strength, for rest, for peace, for joy, and they're not Jesus. A lot of those things aren't Jesus. We live in a culture that makes instant gratification instant. And oftentimes those very things get in the way of us really running. And it shows up in silly things like, I never go to bed on time. And then I don't wake up early enough to actually spend time with God. And then I feel guilty. And it just becomes this kind of negative spiral. And there's nothing inherently evil about staying up a little late, but when it starts to trip us up, and that's just one example. We all have examples that between us and Jesus, we know, maybe I should let this go. Maybe this is one thing that because I want to love Jesus and pursue Jesus, I'm going to let this thing go. Even though it's not an evil thing, I'm going to let it go because for me, it's getting in the way. And I have things in my life that God frequently convicts me about, saying, Levi, this isn't an evil thing, but it's taking your eye off the ball. It's taking away your time with me. It's taking away. It's filling you with hopes and joys that aren't in me. And then in verse 8 of chapter 4, Paul says, now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to those who have longed for his appearing. This is an amazing verse. It's just as deep as the other verses we've looked at. It causes us again to ask the question, what am I longing for? What am I longing for? That word longing is, it's the word agape. It's the word love. It's the perfect tense of it. Longing for his appearing. There's a tremendous amount of an emotional attachment, yearning, thirsting, in this longing for the day of his appearing. And this is this longing for the righteous judge. It's the same righteous judge who appears in verse 1, where we kind of started in the introduction, in the presence of God. Verse 1 says, in the presence of God in Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead in view of his appearing and his kingdom. What does it mean to love and long for and yearn for this? It's all bound up in that word love and the combination of that and righteousness. And the combination should make us think of Matthew 5 in the Beatitudes, Matthew 5:6, where Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Why? Because they're going to be filled with what? The thing that they long for, the righteousness that they long for. And here in Timothy, those who long for the just judge, the righteous judge to appear and crown them with the crown of righteousness, that's what they long for. That's what they're going to receive in paradise. They're going to receive the righteousness of Christ fully. They're going to experience it. They're going to experience it more fully than they ever have on this earth. Galatians 5:5 says, for through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. And there's this aspect where we already have this righteousness imputed to us, it's been given to us by Christ, and yet we wait for it. And yet there's going to be a fuller glimpse of it in paradise. 2 Peter 3:13 says, but in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and new earth where righteousness dwells. That is what we look forward to. And Isaiah, so there's a bunch of crowns listed in the Bible that God's people receive, that God gives them. The crown of life, the crown of righteousness, but all of them, this crown is a woven crown. It's very similar to the crown of thorns. Okay, it's a woven crown, and there's these elements to it. So there's a little bit of ambiguity here too, but this is the righteousness of Jesus. And Isaiah 28:5 says, "In that day the Lord Almighty will be a glorious crown, a beautiful wreath for the remnant of his people." Ultimately, this crown is him giving us his righteousness, among other things. And it's in his presence, it's in relationship with him, with those who long and thirst and hunger for that righteousness. And this is where God's righteousness will reign. So at this point, we might be thinking, okay, well, that's great. That's great. But I don't know if I'm up for this. I'm forgetful, and I fail, and I'm scared that I'm going to forget this. And my encouragement is to believe in Jesus, because that's the faithfulness, that's the faith-filled eyes that Paul is talking about. Jesus is going to get you there. Put your faith in him. Turn to him. Lean into him. Throw off those things and believe. Let go of all your trying and all your doing. Let go of those things that are tripping you up and believe in him. Because his sacrifice, remember, his sacrifice is the main thing. He's the offering. My life as a drink offering is just a thanks. It's just something I can give back to him. It doesn't earn me anything. And so I can have that weight removed. That's why Jesus can say, "My yoke is easy. Trust in me, follow me." Remember that God is the one who pours us out. And just like Paul says, "I can do all things through him through Christ who strengthens me," we can say that too. We are running the race that God has set before us. And he has not given us a race where he has not been and he will not provide. And so on that race, we are called to rely on him. We're in his hands. He's given us gifts and abilities to use for his glory and his kingdom. So we can use them. As Colossians 3:17 says, "Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him." And lastly, believe that the righteous judge is watching, and he's cheering for you. He's watching, and he's waiting to give you that crown. Fill up your definition of judge with the righteous judge at the games who's watching you run. He's ran that race ahead of you. He's going to get you there, and he's waiting to give you that crown. And run. Worship team, please lead us in one song.
We do our part living for God. We're smart. God will always do his part. Let's stand and sing together.